Okay, this video we'll be doing from a rock garden here in Nagoya somewhere. I don't know where I am, but I'm at a rock garden in Nagoya, and the reading for this week is Ishikawa Jun's Asters. This is a translation by Donald Keene, translated in 1965, I think. What did I say down here? Translated in 1961. Okay, so this is the first English translation of Ishikawa Jun that appeared in 1961. The work was originally published under the title Shion Monogatari, right? Published in 1956, so 11 years after the end of the war. Ishikawa Jun made his debut in 1935, so he'd been writing for over 2 decades at this point, and over 3 decades really if you include his earlier etudes or shusaku. And this work was recently made into an opera, right? And I have a video about that. I'll put the link to that in the description, and it's received international acclaim and will probably run again this year or next year. So yeah, you can watch the video on the opera as well. The work is, okay, Ishikawa Jun, novels from Tokyo, made his debut with the novella Kajin, which I translated as the nymphs. Actually, I translated it as the fair one. Change that translation. We'll do a study guide on that work as well at some point. He won the Akutagawa Prize in 1937 for his 1936 novel Fugen, the Bodhisattva, translated by William Tyler. After the war, he came to be regarded as one of the Gesaku-ha, the Shin Gesaku-ha, the new Gesaku writers. Okay, Gesaku means frivolous work, literally. It was a genre of sort of lowbrow or ludic prose fiction in the Edo period, and he was associated with that tradition. I have a list of his other representative works. There are many others, but let's jump right into the work, the study guide. Okay, so the first part of the study guide, and I think I mentioned this word in the video lecture on the recent opera adaptation of this work, but Ichioku Sozange, right, is a word that appears a lot in the immediate post-war period. Okay, because Japanese had just ended the most horrendous war in human history, right? They suffered defeat in it, and they were all, for the next 10, 20, 30 years, thinking about the meaning of that calamity, that catastrophe, right? So you have this word popping up in newspapers and in fiction and so forth, and it means the collective repentance by 100 million. Okay, so that's in the background of this work. Okay, so people are thinking about the meaning of the war. They're repenting. Some are repenting for it. Some are shifting the blame, the responsibility for the war to the general public rather than the military that launched the war and so forth. But that's in the background. The term was coined shortly after the war by Prime Minister Higashikuni Naruhiko, who called on the Japanese people to repent collectively for the war. His call has been criticized as an attempt to exonerate the militarists and the ruling classes who were directly responsible for the war, and to shift the blame to the entire population. Ishikawa indirectly addresses the themes in this work. He addresses the themes of memory, amnesia, historical amnesia, trauma, repentance, atrocity, murder, and so forth in this story. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind as you read the story, this general historical background. Another word, doppelganger. Okay, a lot of doubles appear in this work, right? Read that definition I give for doppelganger, literally double walker in German. Okay, often figured as a twin, a shadow, a mirror image of the protagonist. So in this work we have the protagonist and we have his double, right? And at the very end of the work we have this curious phrase, comment where he says, Heita is myself, his double, his sort of, yeah. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then another thing to keep in mind possibly as you read this work, Kant, the great German Prussian philosopher Immanuel Kant, in one of his work in Religion Within the Limits of Reason Alone, published in 1794, he delineates the what he considers to be the 4 types of evil. Okay, evil resulting from fragilitas, evil resulting from impuritas. Okay, so he gives the Latin words, I think, even in his German text. Evil resulting from perversitas, i.e. radical evil, evil that privileges inclinations, still pathological, and diabolical evil, okay, which is unpathological, not based on inclinations, contrary to self-interest at times, and elevated to the level of a maxim, okay. So it's somebody who pursues, somebody who is diabolically evil, somebody who pursues evil for its own sake, basically, right? According to some sort of categorical rule, unrelated to his own inclinations and proclivities and so forth, and desires. Okay, so keep in mind these 4 types of evil. Okay, and I have a link to an article about these because they appear in this work. I think you can categorize the characters according to these. Right, somebody could write a paper on this at some point. The 4 types of evil, and Ishikawa's Shion Monogatari. Kant's 4 types of evil and Shion Monogatari. Okay, now we jump into the study questions. Answer all of the following. There are 12 in all here. And then I might have a supplementary worksheet at the bottom, but let's do this first. Number 1. What genres of novel might the work be classified as? Okay, so what are we dealing with here? Is it a monogatari in the sort of traditional Heian classical Japanese sense? Is it a setsuwa? Is it some kind of symbolist novel, right? What is the genre we're in here? Does it fit into any of Todorov's genres? Okay, so we talked earlier in one of the other videos about the great Bulgarian theorist Todorov, who recently died maybe a few years ago. But he wrote a famous book called The Fantastic, right? And he has the category of the fantastic. I'm not going to explain it here. But the category of the fantastic is in contrast to the uncanny on the one hand, and the marvelous on the other hand. The marvelous, an example of the marvelous, for example, is Harry Potter, right? So you know from the beginning all the way to the end that when you're watching the Harry Potter movie or reading the Harry Potter novel, the world of Harry Potter is a different world than our own, right? The usual laws of gravity and logic and physics and so forth do not apply, and we do not have any hesitation regarding that. The uncanny, however, has a lot of weird things in the work, but by the end of the work we realize that everything was a dream, or everything can be explained as a drug hallucination, or so forth, right? It can be explained rationally at the end. Okay, so that's the uncanny. So you have these 2 poles, uncanny and the marvelous. And in the middle is the fantastic. And fantastic is characterized by hesitation on the reader's part and on the character's part about how to interpret the story. Do we read it in the rational mode, i.e. the uncanny mode, as a work of the uncanny, or do we read it as a kind of Harry Potter marvelous mode, as a fantastic? Okay, so consider this work in terms of these 3 terms, right? I don't think it's a example of the fantastic here. Okay, I said I wasn't going to explain it, I ended up explaining it, but on to the next question. Describe the narrative structure of the work. Okay, simple question. Is it first person or third person? If it is third person, where is the focalization point and so forth? What kind of narrative techniques are used? Is there interior monologue, for example? Is there more showing or telling, for example? Is there more narrative, jinobun, the narrative part, or is there more conversation and sort of dramatic interaction between the characters and so forth? Number 3, discuss the role of poetry in the work. Okay, what powers does poetry possess? How does Muneyori, the main character of the story, right, the guy who kind of pursues evil for its own sake at one point, eventually, how does he regard his own poetic gifts? Okay, so you remember that he was born with an extreme talent for poetry, but he rejects it at some point, right? How is it related to his father? Explain the connection between his renunciation of poetry and his rebellion against his father, right? And his father is the high-ranking, I can't remember if he's an emperor or somebody just underneath the emperor's position, but he's very high up there in the aristocracy, and he sort of represents the courtly aristocratic culture, right, of poetry and the arts and so forth. And Muneyori turns against that, turns against bun and in favor of bu, right? Bun and bu are 2 sort of antithetical ideas in Japanese culture. Bun is literature and culture and so forth, culture more generally, and bu is the martial arts, war, killing, and so forth, right? So which of these does he privilege, bun or bu? How are they related, bun and bu? Number 4, explain the significance of the 3 arrows. Okay, these are three arrows, three types of arrow that appear in the work. What does each represent? These are symbols for something, right? How are they related? What discovery does Muneyori make about these three arrows? Okay, the three arrows, one is the arrow of knowledge. Okay, so it kind of sounds like it has biblical references almost to Genesis, the tree of knowledge. This is the arrow of knowledge. The arrow of killing is the second one, which also has sort of biblical references, it seems, to the story of Cain and Abel, right? The first killing. And the third arrow is the arrow of the devil, the mamono. I think in the original it says mamono, devil or evil. Okay, what are these three arrows? What do they represent for Muneyori? On to number 5. At its core, the work is an exploration of the problem of evil, right? In theology, we call this theodicy, okay, a sort of meditation or a study of this problem of evil. Why is there evil? How can all-knowing, all-powerful God justify it, and so forth, right? This work, in its own way, is sort of a Buddhist. Well, it at least has Buddhist themes running through it, Buddhist motifs and so forth. The work is an exploration of the problem of evil. Discuss the 4 types of evil that are represented in the work, which I mentioned above, right, in relation to Kant's 4 types of evil. So discuss the 4 types of evil represented in the work through the 4 main characters: Tonai, okay, Princess Utsuro, Yumimaro, and Muneyori. Okay. And a little hint about these types of evil in order to answer that question of which character of these, of what these 4 characters, what types of evil these 4 characters represent. Think about what they want, what they desire, what they are after, what they are pursuing. So Tonai, that sort of conspiring character Tonai, who's from the outside originally. What does he want? Princess Utsuro, what does she desire? Yumimaro, it's the uncle. He's the uncle of Muneyori. What does he desire? What is he after? And Muneyori, what does he ultimately desire? Okay, and if you can answer that question, you can figure out what types of evil they each represent. Consider these characters in relation to Kant's 4 types of evil mentioned above. Okay, so review what I said above and read that linked article. Also, discuss the ambiguous relation between diabolical evil, which is Muneyori, the main character, and ultimate good, Heita. Okay, so it seems like Ishikawa is implying some sort of connection or affinity between these 2 characters and what they represent. Ultimate good on the one hand with Heita, self-renunciation and so forth, and a sort of Nietzschean will to power, diabolical Ubermensch kind of evil, which is represented in Muneyori. Okay. Number 6, describe the character Heita. Okay, so this is the character who's presented kind of as the opposite of Muneyori, right? Describe this character Heita, although at the end he says Heita is myself, right? Describe his doppelganger-esque relationship to Muneyori. In what ways are they uncanny mirror images of each other, Muneyori and Heita? What are their similarities? What are their differences? Do they complement each other? I should say each other to make a whole, right? Are they kind of 2 sides of the same picture? 2 sides of the same coin kind of thing going on here? Explain. Number 7, describe the 2 settings. Muneyori's province, where his father lives and runs the show, right? And the town beyond the mountain, okay? Sort of forbidden but possibly utopian town beyond the mountain where Heita lives. Describe these 2 settings and the inhabitants, communities, cultures of each. How does each group view the other? What is their relationship to one another? And again, keep in mind the context of the war, right? Japan is the great empire of East Asia at the time, right? From 1931 onward. And it's kind of views the rest of Asia, Indonesia and Vietnam and so forth, as these kind of Heita-esque provincial regions, right? So I think you can read some sort of historical parallels between the Japanese Empire and this work, right? With Muneyori's province and his district, his city, representing civilization, or quote-unquote civilization and imperial life, and Heita's world representing the colonial margins, right? Okay, number 8. This is a question that I often put in there, but it's especially relevant here in this work. I often put it in the study guides. The work abounds in dichotomies, in binary pairs, and so forth. Identify and describe each of these. Okay, so make a list of all the binary pairs that appear in the work. Country and city, for example. Civilization and barbarism, for example. What does Ishikawa seem to be saying about the true nature of these dichotomies, right? So make a list of the dichotomies, figure out in your head what these dichotomies usually, conventionally represent, and then figure out what Ishikawa is trying to say that is original or new, a kind of new understanding of these dichotomies. Okay, so make a list of as many as you can. Life and death, for example. Eros and Thanatos, for example. The life drive and the death drive, and so forth. There are many, and add as many pairs to the list as you can. Number 9 is a very important question about the plants, which are symbolic in this work, right? The Asters is the title of the work, right? Explain the significance of the 3 plants. Shion, Asters in English, Wasude Nagusa, which is the forget-me-nots, and the Wasude Gusa, the grasses of forgetfulness, literally. Or the daily lilies is the other translation for the Wasude Gusa. Okay, so these are the 3 types of plants that appear. Which plant does Muneyori plant? Okay, in what circumstances? For what purposes? Which plants does Heita plant? Okay, in what circumstances? For what purposes? How do these plants relate to the larger themes of the work? Okay, namely the problem of historical memory, history, trauma, atrocity, and so forth, evil, and so forth, right? Okay, so figure out, decode the meanings of these plants, right? And which plant is associated with which character and why, is that question. Number 10. Okay, we're almost done here. Describe the Buddhist statues that are carved into the rocks, right? By Heita, right? Heita lives in that other sort of possibly utopian world that is the contrast of Muneyori's world. And he carves Buddhist statues into the rocks. Why is Muneyori driven to destroy them? Okay, so Muneyori in the end shoots his arrows at them and destroys them, thereby destroying the entire world of Heita, right? Why does Muneyori want to destroy these Buddhist statues in the rocks and thereby Heita's world? What is his beef with this world? Okay, number 11. Okay, that's basically a question about Muneyori's motivation, number 10, which is a very key question in this work. What motivates Muneyori to do what he does, right? And that relates to his specific type of evil that he represents. Number 11, discuss the character of Chigusa. Right? Chigusa's she's originally the fox, right, that he shoots, and she is metamorphoses into a woman, a beautiful woman, whom he falls in love with and he marries, right? How does Chigusa and Muneyori's relationship resemble that of Yang Guifei and Emperor Xuanzong Song from Bai Zhou's Song of Everlasting Regret, okay, which we read. That was the first work that we read for this class, right? And I mentioned in the video for that a lot of Japanese literature through the ages is a retelling of that story between the emperor and Yang Guifei. All right. So do you spot any similarities between Muneyori and Chigusa? Right. So Chigusa, I'm sorry, she was not originally a fox. She's originally from Heita's world, right? She snuck into Muneyori's realm and in disguise, I think, right? So review all that. And number 12, given the main themes of the work, can this work be read as an allegory of post-war Japanese society? I think in one of my descriptions to this work, I called it a Nietzschean allegory about Japanese society during the war and after the war. I don't know what that means, but consider this work in the context of an allegory. And in several of the other study guides, I give a definition of what an allegory is. Review that. An allegory, to put it very briefly, an allegory is a work in which all the major events, all the major characters in the work can be read as symbols for something else, right? So Can this work be read as allegory? If so, what equals what? Mune yori is a symbol for X. Chigusa is a symbol for Y. Heita and his world over the mountains is a symbol for X, Z, right? The final scene where he shoots the Buddhist statues and thereby destroys the entire universe is a symbol for example, nuclear war or something, right? Is this work an allegory? If so, explain. Okay. Further reading, you can read Shibusawa Tatsuhiko's essay about this, but don't worry about that. There have been several other papers written about this work, and the opera too. Definitely check out the opera if you have an opportunity. I think parts of the opera are available on YouTube video. And okay, so that concludes our commentary on the study guide for Ishikawa Jun's Shion Monogatari. If you have any questions, send me an email. Bye bye.